Alright, today we're going to change the oil pan gasket on a 2004 Chrysler Town & Country. And if you're watching this video, your oil pan probably looks something like this, where you clearly have oil right around the edges of the pan. So in order to get these oil pans out, there's a couple of extra pieces you need to remove besides just the oil pan bolts. And they are the transmission plate, the cover plate, which you can see right here, covering the oil pan bolts at the rear of the engine. So to get that out, we're going to remove that 1, 2, 3 bolts, and here you can see there's a large bracket that's going to be blocking the access to that last bolt and also in the way of getting the pan out. So we'll have to remove that bolt right here at the bottom and then loosen the bracket at the top. And let me show you where that is. Come up here behind the engine. There's 2 18mm bolts right there, and then 1 more right there. And we'll loosen all 3 of those to be able to move that bracket out of the way at the bottom. And I'll show you how to do that. So here we have out all the items that I'm gonna need to do this job. Some safety glasses just to keep all that junk from falling into my eyes. A little bit of brake cleaner or equivalent solvent for cleaning up, some paper towels, oil pan gasket, and some number 2 gasket sealer. This gasket set came with some convenient little alignment pins to hold the pan in place, and what looks like an oil pickup tube rubber gasket. We need a 13mm to pull the oil plug, a 1/2" ratchet or impact driver, 3/8 ratchet, a 10mm socket with a long extension, and then a really long double extension with either a swivel 18mm or a universal joint and an 18mm socket to get to the transmission bracket bolt. You don't have to have this, but it sure makes it easier if you do. And a container to put the oil in, drop light, filter, and oil. 13mm wrench. There we go. Okay, and then we'll just unscrew that, drain it into the pan. Filter out. I forgot to mention we need a oil strap, filter strap wrench as well to get that loose. So we'll just loosen that up. And allow that to drain into the pan. Okay, we've got the oil filter off and let it drip until it was done dripping, more or less, and then wiped it off. And now next we're going to take off the transmission bracket that's on the back side of the engine. And here I've got my impact wrench and 1/2" drive wrench ready to go, and I already have the long extension and swivel socket in place so you can see roughly where that is. I'll swing around back so you can get a closer look. Now I'm behind the engine looking towards the front of the vehicle. Here's my 1/2" long extension all the way up there. You can see it's already on 1 bolt. There's another one right next to it. And then the third one, I can see right there. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen those with my impact wrench. If you don't have that, you can just use a regular 1/2" drive. Okay, it turns out that the 3rd bolt on the back of the engine for the transmission mount is actually a 15mm, which is different than the other 2. And a little bit hard to get to with the long extension, so I'm just going to use a regular 1/2" drive ratchet and a socket. Now that I've got the 2 our 3 top bolts on this bracket loose. I'll loosen this bottom one, and then we'll be able to push that out of the way. So once again, up here are the 2 bolts on one side. Those are 18 millimeter. And that one is a 15 millimeter, and those are already loose. All right, we'll get this out of here with the impact wrench. Easy. Pull that loose. You can see that moves a bit. And now we can get access where we couldn't before. So next I'll take these cover plate bolts out, except for one, and swing that out of the way so we can get access to these bolts here at the back. All right, so it turns out that in order to swing that plate, the cover plate, out of the way, this bracket actually needs to drop down a bit, so I had to remove the top 2 screws, and now the whole thing will swing out of the way. And now I can just drop the cover plate out of the way, and now we have clear access up to the last 2 bolts on the back of the engine. Pan down, you can see fully up inside the engine, oil dipstick, pickup tube, and I believe that new gasket goes right here if you take that off. Okay, I've got all the gasket and oil and grease cleaned up off very thoroughly all the way around. You're going to want to make sure you spend the most amount of time doing this part, and that it's absolutely free of any oily residue. I used brake cleaner, just sprayed on some paper towels and wiped it down really thorough. You want to pay extra close attention to the areas that are hard to get, like back behind these bolts right here, and anywhere where 2 pieces of metal join together. You're going to want to make sure that you run a blade over that to make sure that it's flush. There's one there, and especially towards the very back of the engine where it meets the transmission. The last thing you want to do is have to go through all this trouble and then have it leak because one spot wasn't quite clean enough. So make sure you pay extra care and attention to getting that thoroughly clean and free of oil before you continue. Okay, I've got the oil pan thoroughly cleaned using the solvent and making sure that every last bit has been cleaned off and it's smooth to the touch all the way along the flange. Although it looks like it might not be here, it actually is. That's just some discoloration, but it is completely smooth and dry all the way around, thoroughly cleaned on the inside and outside. And now we're ready to start putting it back together. Okay, the next step in putting this oil pan gasket in is to thread these little guides that were provided with the oil pan up in here, just finger tight, and they've got a little barb on it that holds everything in place while you're working, so that makes it a bit easier to handle. So you want to check that gasket for fit before you put any sealer on it, which I've already done. So I'll put that sealer on the top side and then snug that gasket up over those pins. Making sure there's no gaps, especially right here at the corners where the metal parts join together on the engine block. Now you don't want this stuff inside of the holes so that it's getting on the thread, so give each one a little clean out with a Q-tip or something like that, just to help keep it off the threads. Okay, I've got the gasket up in there. stuck against the engine block with the guides in place. Now I'm going to put sealer on the bottom side, and then we'll snug the pan up in there. Alright, got the sealer in there. Just spread that on by hand, make sure there's no gaps. And right here at the back, you want to put a little extra where it has to bridge this long gap without a bolt in it. So put a little extra right there to make sure that gets sealed up good. Now we'll get that oil pan on. Okay, we've got the oil pan up in the car now, or the van, and we've torqued all the bolts, starting from the inside and moving out in an X pattern from left to right. Got the cover plate back in. Got the support brackets in and tightened. Now we're going to put the oil filter on, fill the engine with oil, and let it cure overnight, and then we'll be all done.